attend the first in a series of 4 candidate forums for the riding of, and this one is for Kitchener Centre. Thank you to our candidates that have taken time out of their schedule as well. I know it's a busy time during the election campaign. The Chamber takes its role in the political process very seriously. We are a nonpartisan organization and work with all of our government and elected officials municipally, provincially, and federally. And these candidate forums are an important opportunity for our members and the community to hear about issues of concern and importance primarily to business and the business community. This is the first in the 4 events organized by the Greater KW Chamber of Commerce in advance of the October 21st vote. The debate for Waterloo riding will be held tomorrow at the Inn of Waterloo at 4 p.m. Kitchener South Hespeler will be held in Cambridge City Hall on Wednesday, and Kitchener-Conestoga will be at Woolwich Arena in Elmira on Thursday. As always, I want to thank our friends at 570 News. They partnered with us for many of our candidate forums, both provincially and federally, and appreciate them participating with us today. And for this series of 4, James Sebastian Scott, who is an old friend of mine, and I see regularly when I'm taping my radio show at 570, has agreed to do all of 4 of our candidate forums, and I do appreciate him bringing his expertise to these candidate forums. So without further ado, I will turn it over to James, who will moderate the session. James.
Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending our candidate debate for the riding of Kitchener Centre. The format for this event will be 90-second introductory remarks from each candidate, followed by questions in priority areas identified by the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce through their advisory committees and responses from the membership at large. The questions will be asked in rotation, and I, the moderator, reserve the right to terminate answers where appropriate. Also, after all candidates have answered a particular question, a candidate can ask for a rebuttal on the comments made by any one of the other participants, and I, the moderator, reserve discretion of whether to follow the rebuttal or allow the rebuttal and also terminate the discussion when required. At the conclusion of the debate, each candidate will be allowed 1 minute for closing remarks, which will proceed in reverse order from opening remarks. Now, I have the order that we picked here at random. I will now commence the 90-second opening remarks. The candidate order, as determined, is Stephen Woodworth from the Conservative Party of Canada.
Good afternoon. I spent 30 years as a lawyer fighting for my clients, 9 years as a school trustee protecting students and parents' rights, 7 years as an MP helping thousands of constituents with their problems. I've got the skills and dedication you need to help you get ahead. I adopted the slogan, "Your voice in Ottawa," to remind myself to be different. I don't want to represent the government to you. I want to represent you to the government. And that's still my motto. I'm proud Andrew Scheer made this election about helping ordinary families get ahead. Politics should not be about raising taxes and making life harder for people. The Green Party platform coldly describes the misery of politician-caused unemployment this way, quotes, "structural adjustments which are disruptive and stressful for workers and their families." Structural adjustments. In the last recession, I had to look people in the eye. 50-year-old workers who lost their jobs were struggling to provide for their families. Indifferent politicians won't treat people like mere statistics if I can stop it, but I need your help. Our platform has detailed ideas to meet the challenge of climate change. We plan 5 careful years to balance the budget after 4 years of reckless spending. We'll give everybody a break from high taxes. We'll modestly increase health and social programs. We don't need grandiose schemes. We need sure and steady progress with detailed, achievable policies. That's what Conservatives offer. Thank you.
And Patrick Bernier from the People's Party of Canada to follow.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Bernier with the People's Party of Canada, Kitchener Centre. It's a great crowd today. Very appreciative to see you all here today and to be a part of this together. Some of you, it's your first time hearing me speak today. Others heard me on the CBC or at the climate debate. I have been light in figures. It's true. I have brought you a number today. That number is 12,800. That's approximately the population of Wilmot Township, Baden, New Hamburg, Luxembourg together. Mr. Saini, this is a performance review. And during your term, under your watch, 12,800 Canadians have died of opioids. That's a humanitarian crisis. More than 200 people who won't be here to vote you out. For shame, sir. For shame.
Thank you, Patrick. And from the Green Party Canada, Mike Morris.
Well, I'll start with an introduction, and if James will allow me, there might be room for a rebuttal. I wasn't expecting to have that needed in the introductions. My name is Mike Morris. I'm the Green Party candidate in Kitchener Centre. It was over 10 years ago that I started Sustainable Water of the Region. And I did so at the time for two reasons. One, I was frustrated with the lack of political action on climate change. And secondly, also because I knew our community was ready to rally together and to take a stand. 10 years later, it's now dozens of companies right across our community and hundreds across the country who've now both increased their profitability and reduced their carbon pollution at the same time. Today, though, I remain pretty frustrated with the lack of political action on climate change. And also, it's now even more so around the affordability challenges that so many across our community are facing. At a time when wages across Kitchener Centre are among the lowest in the province and gaps in our healthcare system continue to affect so many across our community. And so the fact is the status quo is not working. There are far too many of our neighbors on the financial brink, and homeownership is increasingly out of reach for most. And I know that many of you are worried too. I've been out the last 5 months now listening at doors across our community, and I know that you're worried too. And so now we have a chance to make a different choice, to move past the divisive politics of left versus right and focus on securing a bright future for our kids. And that's why, as your member of Parliament, I'd be focused on the affordability of housing, on addressing mental health, on taking real action on climate change. And as a Green MP, I'd be doing politics differently, just as other Green representatives are already doing so from PEI to Guelph to BC, putting our communities ahead of the politics and putting people ahead of the parties. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And next is Andrew Moraga from the New Democratic Party of Canada.
Hi, my name is Andrew Moraga, and I'm the NDP candidate. Is the microphone on?
We'll let you restart there, Andrew, once the microphone's hot.
Okay,
there you go.
Surprise. Okay. So we will try that again. My name is Andrew Moraga, and I'm the federal NDP candidate for Kitchener Centre. I'm the son of an auto worker. My whole life, my dad has built cars, and that's what supported my family. And it supported, a family of 5. It meant that I could go to school. It meant that my mom could go back to school when I was in high school to get her law degree. Good jobs are the foundation of our communities and the foundation of our society. My aunt took a risk and became a young entrepreneur. She opened a bakery, and it was amazing, and it was very popular in our community. But then the recession happened, and unfortunately she lost the business because she couldn't afford to keep it open anymore. We need to make sure that we are supporting small businesses and medium-sized businesses, because those are who provide the most jobs across Canada for Canadians, and they provide good quality jobs. We need to make sure that they have the supports in place so that they can attract workers and pay them a fair wage. We understand that small businesses are being pushed to the brink, and we intend to have the supports to make sure that they can make it through these troubling times, and not only make it through, but thrive and prosper. We want to support innovation, clean technology, and all of the great services that Canadians across the country believe in. And as your representative for Kitchener Centre, I want to make sure that I'm your partner in Ottawa, supporting all of the great initiatives that you're doing and making sure that funding comes to our community to support the amazing small, medium-sized businesses and great community organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Up next and last, Raj Saini, the incumbent from the Liberal Party of Canada.
Hello, can you hear me? No? Hello? Yeah, okay. So thank you very much to the Chamber for putting on this event. I think it's very important that you hear from all of us. In 2015, the economy was very sluggish. We were coming out of another recession. We had no plan for the environment. We had no plan for social justice. Everything was flat. There was no vision for this country. In 4 short years, what did we do? We put in the Canada Child Benefit that lifted almost 300,000 children out of poverty. With the economic growth that we've had, Canadians have created 1 million jobs and lifted a further 800,000 people out of poverty. We put a price on pollution. We're protecting our conservation areas, and we protected our coastal waters. We put an ocean maritimes plan in place. Why am I telling you this? Because we're not talking about it, we're actually doing it. We signed free trade deals with 2/3 of the global GDP. What does that mean? That 2/3 of the wealth of this world, we have now free trade deals with, fair and free trade. We're the only G7 country that has a free trade deal with another G7 country, helping our local businesses here be able to export their product. When we talk about affordability, we already have a national housing strategy that's worth $55 billion over 10 years. In Kitchener Centre alone, over the last 2 years, we built 1,700 affordable housing units. So everything that everybody's talking about, we're actually already doing, and I need your support to continue doing more for this riding and for this region. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll open up to the question portion of the evening. I know we started off on the opioid issue, so I know I'm going to let Mr. Saini respond to that, and I know that Mr. Morris wanted to respond as well. So Mr. Saini, if you wanted to respond to that, I'll allow it.
Yes, I think the opioid crisis is a crisis that's affecting pretty well every community in Canada. And I think that Mr. Bernier didn't have to be so graphic by saying 12,000, but anyway, that's his way of expressing himself. But I don't think his party has any real plan. But our party does have a plan. And in the last couple of budgets, we put in more than $231 million to deal with these crises. And one of the first things that we did was we created an emergency fund of $150 million to make sure that the provinces and territories had access to this funding for emergency programs. The second thing we did is we made sure that there was science behind it, because for many years, we didn't even know what drugs were causing the overdose or not. There was no data being collected. So now we've got a scientific approach of making sure we collect data to know exactly where the drugs are coming from, which part of the population is being affected. Third thing we did, we know a lot of the drugs come over illegally from the United States. One of the things that the previous government did is they defunded the Canada Border Services. So we put more funding back into Canada Border Services to make sure that they're able to stop fentanyl and other illicit drugs from crossing the border. And the fourth thing we did is we allowed 25 consumption sites across the country to exist. And as you know, one opened this summer in July. So we've done a lot to wrap around the services to make sure not only the police forces have the resources they need. I've taken a drive with the police forces, with paramedics, to make sure that I got an understanding of the problem. I had many meetings with community advocates. As a pharmacist, I know how brutal this is, but the federal government is engaged in this process. We're working with our local partners, and we continue to want to do more. Going forward, we will have more rehabilitation beds. We will try to assist the medical responders as much as we can, and we'll fund more medical services in terms of more mental health money to make sure that this problem is solved once and for all. Thank you.
And Mr. Morris, on a response to Mr. Bernier, and then I will come to you after Mr. Bernier.
Yes, I want to just clarify that the structural changes that Mr. Woodworth was referring to is around our economy to actually put people first. An example is the billions of dollars of subsidies to fossil fuels. Right now it's $3 billion that we would be advocating, and as your member of Parliament in Ottawa, I'd be advocating that we put that into people, into the people that are working in the oil and gas sector, and in sectors across the economy, to ensure we put them first and that we support them in transitioning, whether it's around retraining or income replacement, at a time when we know that the insured losses from climate change alone last year were $1.9 billion. And that the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy projects are going to increase the cost of climate change inaction in the tens of billions. Yes, I would be working across party lines to actually put people first and to put in place the kind of transitions we need to ensure that Canadians across the country are working in the economy of the future and not subsidizing that of the past. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier, in response to Mr. Morris and Mr. Woodworth, I did see you wanted to rebut that as well.
Thank you. The 12,800 number that I have here is a number that I took from the Canadian government website. So is it ignorance or negligence? This hasn't been dealt with. This is a performance review from a taxpayer. Affordability is a crisis. Affordability is part of this. I mean, really, it's a shorter distance than we want to believe to go from comfort to need. When everybody's living toe to the line, it takes a couple wrong turns to end up in situations that you don't want to end up in. There's a lot of money being sent abroad, being sent overseas, noble causes. At the same time, there's Canadians. There's natives with fecal matter in their water. There's people dying of opioids and all sorts of other drugs. We need to come up with a program that's the opposite of what's being done. Harm reduction, decriminalization, legalization. These are things, if every drug dealer right now was remitting some taxes, we wouldn't be in this mess that with this legalized marijuana has been rolled out totally ineffectively and mismanaged. It's another one of the failures, and that's why I'm running for the PPC. Because I won't support liberal and conservative failure anymore.
Mr. Woodworth.
Thank you very much. Mr. Morris is completely ignoring the quote that I gave you, which is right out of the Green Party policy platform. Structural adjustments are disruptive and stressful for workers and their families. We're not talking about putting workers first. We're not talking about just eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. The Green Party is talking about throwing tens of thousands of people out of work. They're talking about shutting down pipelines, banning oil transport, eliminating natural gas production, shutting down the whole resource sector of our economy, which even worse is so geographically situated in Western Canada that it creates federal-provincial tensions and problems for national unity. And the fact of the matter is that if you look a worker in the eye who's lost their job, you just can't talk about it in those terms, stress and disruption. The Green Party is also living in a fantasy world where they're going to try and create 4 million jobs just like that and train everybody that they throw out of work for those 4 million jobs. It just can't be done. Mr. Saini is fond of telling us that the Liberal government has created 1 million jobs in the last 4 years. Well, first of all, our population has increased by by quite a bit more than 1 million. But apart from that, if it takes 4 years for a Liberal government to create 1 million jobs, how many years is it going to take for a Green government to produce 4 million jobs? And in the meantime, people are stuck in the misery of unemployment. I highly object to that.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, one final thought on this?
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, I know we're still just in the introductions. I just want to clarify, nowhere in the Green Platform does it talk about shutting down the oil sands tomorrow. What it does say is that Green MPs are not supportive of building new pipelines and rather would be redirecting the billions of dollars we're spending either buying or twinning a pipeline and actually investing in the workers. The clean tech economy is growing at 4.8% faster than the rest of the economy at a time when we continue to subsidize oil and gas 12 times that of the clean economy. And so that's why, as a Green MP, I'd be looking to work across party lines to actually invest in people and, yes, to create jobs while we retrofit buildings across the country. Good paying, dignified jobs in a just transition that ensures that no one gets left behind.
So why talk about stress?
Sorry,
and
Mr.
disruption?
Whitworth, do you have a rebut for that? I have 10 seconds, I got to move on.
Just their platform talks about creating stress and disruption for workers. What are you talking about?
Again, it's introduction. I'm talking about prioritizing workers and putting people first.
Thank you. We're moving on. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the largest business organization in Canada, has asked for a royal commission to study the national taxation system to implement fairness and simplicity for all classes of taxpayers. There's been no comprehensive review of the tax system in 50 years, and the system is a patchwork that does not serve individuals or businesses in the 21st century. Would you support this royal commission, and if not, what would you propose to fix the tax system? And first to respond, Mr. Bernier from the People's Party of Canada.
I don't think we need a royal commission to answer your question at this stage. The PPC, the People's Party, has a plan for income tax, and really the first $15,000 is very easy to understand, no tax. Between $15,000 and $100,000, it's a 15% flat tax, like in the sense, and 25% on anything $100,000 and up, and that's the system. Very easy, no need for a commission. We'd also reduce the corporate taxes to 10%. And having more money in your pocket, there's two ways of solving problems. We were talking to some students today at KCI, and that's how I explained it, is that you either, the government takes the money and spends the money for you and tells you where it needs to be spent, or you keep some of your hard-earned money and you spend it where you want to spend it. And that will dictate, the money will then be flowing, and the things that people are buying most will be appreciated. And that's how it's done in the market.
Thank you. Mr. Morris?
Yeah, thank you. So there are significant needs across our community and across the country to be investing in areas like our healthcare and in housing. And so we need to, and of course, in taking real action and following the science on climate change. And so we need to be pairing that level of ambition with what's required to meet the needs of our neighbors with the pragmatism of how we're going to pay for it. And that's why in the Green Platform, there's significant attention paid to looking at corporate taxation. Because over the last number of decades, corporate taxes have declined while personal income taxes have increased. In fact, it's to the point where the Parliamentary Budget Officer over the last year looked at the legal tax loopholes and havens and all the rest, and the number's $25 billion a year in legal corporate tax loopholes at a time when our tax rate is already 6 points below the United States, and they just finished reducing theirs to 21. Ours is at 15%. And so what Greens are talking about is keeping the small business tax rate at its current levels while actually increasing our corporate tax rate to be in line with our largest trading partner, and by doing so, bringing in an extra $9 billion to pair with that 25, along with the billions in subsidies to fossil fuels, to ensure that we can demonstrate the pragmatism of what it's going to take to invest in the priorities right across the country, including real action on climate change, including investments in our healthcare, dental. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those as we go on. Thank you.
Andrew Moraga. Mr. Moraga?
Thank you. We believe in putting people at the center of all decisions. So when we're talking about addressing climate change, what's often happening is we're leaving behind everyday people. We have to make sure that we're not making solutions unaffordable. I would love an electric car, a Tesla, but they're super expensive and most people can't afford a brand new car at all, never mind an electric one. So we have to make sure that our decisions are accessible. We want to make sure that people have the health care that they need. The NDP in a minority situation are the ones who brought us universal health care. But we've been underfunding our system for decades at this point, and you can't austerity spend your way out of an underfunded public service. So we need to make sure that it has the resources that it needs. And we don't believe in raising taxes for no reason. We don't want to tax families out of whatever money they do have under the current system. We don't want to make life harder. What we're asking is the people that we invest in, that they invest back in us. The business owners, the people with the large amounts of wealth. We have contributed to training their workers, to making sure that there's roads to their businesses, making sure that we fund healthcare so that is not a corporate expense. We have invested into these businesses from our tax dollars in loans, in subsidies, and all of that. And it's only fair that we ask those people to pay back. That's why we want to have a 1% tax on fortunes over 20 million. We invested in those people for them to gain those fortunes. We want to make sure we are closing tax loopholes so that our investments in those businesses are not going overseas. They are staying here in Canada and they're paying for the services that Canadians deserve and that we should all have. We want to make sure that the tax system is fair. We don't need a royal commission, although we wouldn't do it without consultation with the community. We don't want to make life harder for everyday families. We want to make sure that farmers can pass on their farms to their children and to family members without paying excessive taxes in that transfer. We want to make sure that small businesses are not suffering under a system that is not responsive to their needs. We would raise the corporate tax rate to 18% for large businesses. We don't want to shock the community, but we definitely want to send a signal that it's time that they pay their fair share. The NDP is friendly to business, but we believe if your yacht requires 10 people to be homeless, that's a problem. Thank you.
And from the Liberal Party, Mr. Saini.
So the tax system in Canada must be competitive and it must be fair. And one of the first things we did when we took office is we reduced the taxes on the middle class. The other thing we've done over the last 3 years is to make sure that business taxes are competitive, especially the small business tax, and we reduced it from 11 to 9%. The other thing in our platform to help Canadians is that for up to $15,000, we're going to raise the basic personal amount. That will allow 700,000 low-income Canadians not to pay any portion of their federal tax. But we live in a global world, and one of the advantages that Canada has is that our business tax structure is one of the most competitive in the OECD. And what do I mean by that? Because of the multilateral trade agreements that we have, either with NAFTA, either with CETA or TPP, we have this great advantage of having 2/3 of the world's business at our fingertips. We must remain competitive. Raising corporate taxes is just going to drive jobs away from Canada because they can go and locate anywhere, make the product, and sell it back to us. The reason we have been successful over the last 4 years, the reason we have the best economy in the G7, the reason we have the lowest unemployment rate and the lowest poverty rate ever recorded in our history, because we've created a balance between the business community and between personal income taxes. And in terms of the tax loopholes and the people that are sending their money abroad, we've invested $400 million more in the CRA to make sure that we pursue those Canadians who are hiding their money in offshore accounts. But the reason Canada has remained competitive over the last 4 years, and the reason why we have the best economy, is because we've been able to find that balance between small business, the larger businesses, the personal income taxes, but making sure that we remain competitive in terms of our international trade agreements. Thank you.
Mr. Saini, does that mean that your party, does it support the commission or no?
Right now, I think what we're doing right now is working. We're working. The economy is the hottest economy in the world right now, so.
Okay. Mr. Bernier, I'll get to you after Mr. Woodworth says his statement.
Thank you very much. We need a study. And here's what we need to study. The average Canadian family spent more last year on taxes than on housing, food, and clothing combined. Think about that. 44% of the average income of a family goes to taxes. Basic necessities like groceries and housing accounted for only 36% of income. And that was before Team Trudeau's carbon tax, which is only going to increase in the next several years. That's what we need to study. Now, quite frankly, I'm not a fan of royal commissions. I think they give a lot of lawyers a lot of money. Maybe as a former lawyer, I should be in favor of that, but I'm not. I think what we should do is start with a parliamentary committee study on the question of why Canadian families have to pay so much of their income toward taxes. Now, Mr. Saini's memory is a little shorter than mine when he says that the Liberals have lowered taxes on small business. I remember very well when Justin Trudeau and Liberal Finance Minister Morneau were characterizing small businesses as tax cheats. In fact, what the Conservative government will do is repeal Trudeau's tax increases on small business investments. We'll exempt spouses from Trudeau's tax increases on small business dividends. We'll make it easier for every Canadian to navigate Canada's tax system and the Canada Revenue Agency. And we will, of course, repeal the carbon tax. We'll take GST off of home heating costs. We will reduce the lowest income bracket tax rate by 1.25%. We'll leave more money in people's pockets. We'll make life easier for Canadians.
Mr. Saini, I wanted to respond to Mr. Woodworth. And
Yes,
Mr. Bernier, I'll come back to you.
Yes, I think, first of all, I think the Conservative Party of Canada is the only party in the Western world who has a climate plan where emissions are actually going to go up. And I don't know how that works, but apparently their climate plan is going to make emissions go up rather than reduce them. Number two, when he talks about the carbon tax, he's only telling you half the story, because there is a rebate that's given back to Canadians, and 8 out of 10 Canadian families will be better off with the rebate than without the rebate. So I think this is just fear-mongering. In terms of all the tax credits they're doing, you know, the only way you can take advantage of a tax credit is actually if you spend money. We're actually trying to put money in the pockets of those people who need it. Vulnerable Canadians, seniors, students. They don't need to spend money to save money. They need to receive the help they need to live their lives. So whether it's seniors, whether it's students, whether it's low-income Canadians, tax credits aren't the way to go. It's better to help them directly than do any tax credits. But this thing about this carbon tax, Mr. Woodworth, you have to make sure that you tell the full story. The full story is there's a climate rebate that's given back, and 8 out of 10 families are going to be better off. So, you know, I think we should be clear about certain things. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier, and then Mr. Woodworth, I'll get back to you.
The hottest economy in the world, or one of them, that's suspect. If this is one of the hottest in the world, we're in big trouble, all of us globally. People can't afford it. People are having trouble affording to live it. Everywhere I go, I talk to people. This campaign's been a real eye-opener. Affordability, affordability, affordability. Toe to the line, no more to give. Seniors, the veterans, the homeless, First Nations, what happened to them in this hottest economy in the world?
Mr. Woodworth?
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Saini says we have to tell people the whole truth. I'd like to suggest to him that we have to just start by telling people the truth. The fact of the matter is that in 2012, after 6 years of a Conservative government, greenhouse gas emissions were 5.1% lower than the 2005 levels, even though the economy had grown by 10% during that same period. And I believe that greenhouse gas emissions continued to reduce in the 3 years after 2012. It's only since the Liberals have taken office that they've begun to go up again. The fact of the matter is that we don't have to push the panic button, that we can rely on human ingenuity. We have a plan. Look at arealplan.ca. You'll see many, many climate change measures which will not only reach Canada's emissions targets, which were set by a Conservative government, but which will also take the battle global and make a real difference to climate change.
Mr. Saini, and then Mr. Moraga, I'll get to you.
just one point. When he talked in 2012 about the emissions being 5.1% lower, that had nothing to do with the Conservative government. That was the Ontario Liberal government, which shut down coal. That was the only reason that the emissions went down. So again, he's got to tell the truth.
Mr. Moraga?
I just wanted to talk about people and how we, as the NDP, believe in people, giving people a hand up. I'm a scientist, that's what my trade is, that's what my job is, and I've done research that's contributed to Canada's greenhouse gas inventory report that's submitted to the UN. And I can tell you as a scientist that the government has not been listening to us. The conservatives muzzled scientists, and then the Liberals don't listen to us when they're purchasing pipelines and giving massive subsidies out. You know, I'm a scientist and I'm a young person who's sitting here because I know that I have to inherit this problem. I have to inherit the debt, I have to inherit the climate crisis, I have to inherit all of that. But in doing that, I'm not afraid of it because I believe that there's a plan and that we can help people. We have to make sure that these solutions are centered on people, on all people, and by focusing on not leaving them behind and making sure they're at the table, that's how we accomplish things. The NDP has the most diverse slate of candidates when it comes to a number of measures, from women to people of backgrounds of color, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and that's who needs to be at the table. We know from studies that businesses are more successful the more diverse their boards are because they're bringing more perspectives to the table. And I think the NDP has that strength because we've brought those candidates in to make sure that our policies are responsive. All the other parties here have less candidates of color and diversity than we have, and I'm disappointed to see that the Green Party has the least amount of diversity in their candidates, less so than the PPC. I'll just leave that for you. Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Whitworth, we do have to move on, but a quick 10 seconds to the response to Mr. Saini.
Well, I don't think Mr. Saini should write off the tremendous advances we made in reducing emissions in the transport sector by harmonizing our emission reductions with the Americans, nor do I think he should ignore the fact that the Liberals' own carbon tax plan gives a big exemption for coal-fired facilities based on a threshold of 800 tons per gigawatt hour, whereas our Conservative plan will have a threshold of 370 tons per gigawatt hours for natural gas and carbon and coal. So our plan actually will create a tougher threshold for coal-fired facilities than the Liberal one.
Mr. Morris, last word. I got to move on.
Well, yeah, I thought the question was about taxation. If you want to talk about climate change, I'd love to talk about climate change, and I'll wait for a question on that. I just want to respond. In terms of diversity, I would welcome anyone. Please come by our office any day of the week. I am so proud of the mix of people in our campaign office every day, from a mix of geographies across our community, sexual orientations, ethnicities, ages. You'll see 12-year-olds with grandparents. It is a wide mix of people across our community that have come together in our campaign over the last 8 months, and it's something I'm very proud of.
Thank you. Moving on. What is your party's overall position on tax cuts for business and personal taxpayers? And from the Green Party, Mr. Morris.
Yeah, I think this has been covered. Again, on taxation, I think the biggest thing to look at is the loopholes. This is where we could reclaim when you think about the big money it's going to take to invest in the priorities across our community, the legal shelters and tax havens and all the rest, including the subsidies. Again, on oil and gas, it's 12 times what we invest in the clean tech sector, for example, and that's where I think we can be looking at ensuring that yes, we invest in small businesses, the engines of our economy, and we ensure that that corporations are paying their fair share to then contribute to ensuring that we follow through on the commitments and needs of people across our community.
Mr. Moraga, on the tax cut issue for businesses?
We believe in a fair tax system the way we believe in fair trade and not just free trade. It needs to be accessible for the people who need it, and it needs to hold the people who have more resources accountable. I have a friend who's opened a salon recently, and he's just starting up, but most of his income that he gets goes towards taxes, and he barely gets any break. So that's not a very favorable system for small businesses and medium businesses, whereas massive corporations are not being required to pay the taxes that they owe when they have the capacity to do so. So the NDP believes in making sure it's fair. We love businesses, we love business, we just want to make sure that workers also have a good life, that they can buy the things that they want and that they need, and that our society is strong. We believe that helping people makes the economy stronger, and we see that. We have evidence for that. So we want to make sure that those tax loopholes are closed for the very rich corporations who are pretty much the only ones who can exploit it. My friend with his small salon can't exploit those tax loopholes, and so they don't help him. We have to make sure that businesses that are large are paying the taxes that they owe, and that small and medium businesses have the supports that they need to be successful and to thrive, because those are the major job creators in Canada, and that's what we believe in supporting. Thank you.
Mr. Staney?
Actually, we've actually done the work. We're just not talking about it. So we reduced the small business tax from 11 to 9%. We've also done something very creative in our platform, is that what we've said is that any small business or any large business that creates any technology which is zero emissions, then their tax rate for that technology will go to half. And why is that important? Because in the G20, the 20 most industrialized countries in the world, Canada is a leader in clean tech innovation. We've invested in over 900 companies over the last 4 years, making sure that companies have the resources to fight climate change. But more importantly, he's also incentivizing companies. I mean, we can talk about it, but actually you need a plan. And we have a plan that any company or any business that creates a zero emissions technology, then they will have their corporate taxes reduced by half. So we've done two things. We've incentivized business, we're going to create employment, but also we're going to make sure that we have access to clean technologies in the future, but also having the ability to sell those clean technologies in the world. So we're very, very mindful of what small business needs, what large business need, but we're also mindful of investing in businesses in making sure that they create the clean products of tomorrow. Thank you.
Mr. Woodworth?
Thank you very much. I think I'd like to just set the table with a couple of facts first. So at the end of 2017, there were nearly 1.15 million small businesses in Canada. And the majority of small business owners in Canada are medium income earners. And yet they were called tax cheats by the Trudeau Liberal government. That government raided their small businesses' rainy day funds by trying to tax passive investments at up to 73%, and then taking away the small business rate from businesses that save too much. In addition, I think people need to know that according to a report by MEI, the federal regulatory burden now includes more than 136,000 federal rules, an increase of more than 4,300 since the Canadian Chamber of Commerce tallied federal regulations in 2015. And those federal regulations are on top of thousands of others provincially. So our government will, that is to say, the Conservative platform will repeal Trudeau's tax increases on small business investments. We will exempt spouses from Trudeau's tax increases on small business dividends. We will reduce federal regulation by 25%. We'll implement a 2-for-1 rule for new regulations. We'll assign a minister directly to the Prime Minister to lead red tape reduction efforts, and we will mandate ministers and regulators to support innovation, economic growth, and global competitiveness. We will champion Canada's small businesses to the world. Those are sensible, moderate ideas which you will find in our platform. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier?
So Mr. Saini is saying that his government has done very creative things to make life unaffordable. House prices have doubled, groceries have doubled, rent has doubled. What creative things were done for the seniors, the veterans, the homeless, the addicted, First Nations, the people in need? According to the mayor's office, there's 300 to 600 homeless people in downtown Kitchener. That's a lot of people who need help, and they've been totally overlooked I wonder what creative things have been done about that over the last 4 years.
Mr. Bernier, what is your response to the question on tax cuts for business and personal taxpayers?
Definitely get into that, my good friend.
Okay.
Thank you, yes. So with regard to that, so taxation. So taxation is going to be simplified under the PPC platform. So as we talked about income tax, it's going to be 0 for the first 15,000. It's going to be 15% for 15,000 to 100,000, and then 25% for 100,000 and up. Corporate tax, it'll be 10%. And then also, we'll repatriate a lot of money from the taxes that are being sent right now, so we can balance the budget in 2 years. So making life affordable again, that's a PPC goal. And income tax, corporate tax, these play big roles in getting the costs of living down, so we can spend our money and help people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce has for 20 years led efforts to recruit family doctors into our region. What does your party propose to address the national doctors shortage? And first, Mr. Moraga.
Thank you for the question. We believe in funding healthcare adequately and making sure that people have access to the services they need from the top of their toes, from the top of their head to the tips of their toes, and from the beginning of their life to their end. People work so hard their whole lives. They deserve to retire with dignity and respect and have a good life. We would invest properly in the healthcare services that we need. And yes, it is a provincial jurisdiction, but provinces rely on the money that comes from the federal government, and the federal government keeps refusing to support provinces in the amount of money that they asked. Even with a liberal federal government and a liberal provincial government, they were still having words with each other, and it looked like another boxing match was about to break out with how much little they were getting from what they were asking for. Even in this region, I think it starts with investing in what we need. So we have a medical school in downtown Kitchener, the Waterloo Regional Campus of the Michael de Groot McMaster Medical School, and they have the base services they need to build up. What they need is support. What they need are partners in Ottawa and provincially to help them do that. And a lot of the doctors that are trained at that school end up staying in the region, and we need more doctors in Waterloo region, but also across Canada. So it starts by making sure that there's funding for the resident spaces at hospitals, because oftentimes medical students who graduate med school don't have the training opportunities that they need, so they have to go to another country because there's no more spots here. The government needs to fund the resident medical opportunities. They need to make sure that the medical schools have the funding they can use to train students, because medical doctors have to take time out of their surgery schedules, out of their clinic, their patient care schedules to teach, and we need to be funding that. And as we see an aging population, people have worked so hard, and it's not fair that they are left in hallways for hours at a time, that they have to wait in the emergency room, and they don't have access to the doctors that they need. The NDP brought us universal health care, and we want to finish that job by making sure that people are covered and that they have access to the service that they need. Thank you.
Mr. Saini on the national doctor shortage.
Thank you very much. I believe we're the only party that has put this in our platform. So what we have said is, and I know this firsthand as a pharmacist, is how difficult it is for many patients to find a family doctor. In many cases, we have to send them to the walk-in clinic, and if it's after hours, sometimes you have to send them to the hospital. And there's a huge expense in all of that, whether it's a clinic or whether it's the hospital. So this is something that I think that we are the only party that has a platform commitment that we're going to be spending up to $6 billion a year, because we know that there's at least 5 million Canadians that don't have access to a primary care physician. And we recognize that in terms of making sure that people have the first person to go to deal with their medical issues. But there's something also I'm very proud of, something that I worked over the last 4 years, is making sure that we finally get to a national pharmacare plan. And over the last 4 years, I've held many meetings with many stakeholders, with ministers, with the Prime Minister, in making sure that we have a platform commitment that every Canadian in this country will have a family care physician, but will also have access to medications across the country. So that's one of the things. And the third thing that we have done over the last 2-3 years is that we have committed $11 billion for mental health and palliative care, in making sure that people have all the mental health services that they need, and also for palliative care to make sure that people are taking care of the end stage of their life. So we're looking at this in a complete circle, from having people have access to a primary care physician, National Pharmacare Plan, mental health, and palliative care. And we're the only party that has this in our platform. Thank you.
Mr. Reg, I'll come to you after everyone has had a chance. Mr. Woodworth.
Thank you very much. You may remember that in 2006, the former Conservative government did a great thing, and that is we initiated a program of annual increases to provincial transfers for medical purposes. It was 6% a year from 2006 right up until 2015, and then we committed to continue that at a rate of 3% per year indefinitely. That's twice the rate of inflation. And so that's more than enough money to assist provinces to get back to where they should be after the Liberal cuts of the 1990s to transfer payments. And our record speaks for itself. We did that throughout our term and will continue to do that, and we've renewed that commitment in our current platform, 3% a year increases in medical and social program transfers from the Government of Canada to the provinces. Now, I have to tell you that Mr. Saini and Team Trudeau Liberals platform commitments aren't worth the paper they're written on. Mr. Trudeau, at last time I checked, was already up to about 40 of his 2015 platform commitments that he didn't deliver. None of these commitments that Mr. Saini has mentioned have been costed by any independent agency, not pharmacare, not the family doctor commitment. You're going to have to cross your fingers and hope that those aren't among the platform commitments that Mr. Trudeau would ignore and disregard should he be elected again. I'd like to close on one final point, and that is the fact that medical care is under provincial jurisdiction means that it's highly important that we have a good relationship between the Prime Minister and the premiers. And the way that Justin Trudeau goes around the country trashing Doug Ford, trashing Jason Kenney, making them into political footballs in this election does not bode well for a Prime Minister Trudeau after this election. How is he ever going to work in harmony with the provinces on medical care after what he's done during this election to those leaders? I think we need a better approach than that. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier, national doctor shortage in response.
So doctors, yes, we'll work definitely close with the provincial counterparts with regard to Medicare and medical for doctors. Now, I have a couple ideas. I think one would be to remove restrictions, especially from new Canadians who are surgeons or doctors or in any medical field that come, and they could start working, they know what to do, but then we make them go through this huge process. A couple of them, I spoke to them on my campaign, and it's a real rigmarole. So there's a lot of people that are able and willing to help in a medical style, and they're just not allowed to by the government. Secondly, make it easier to become a doctor. There's a cap on doctors, and you know, I was in Europe recently, and there's a doctor on every second street corner. Everybody's a doctor. That's what people want to do, so there's access to services. People should be allowed to be doctors and not have all these restrictions and caps. And those doctors, they also have a different system that's private options, which is the third thing. Private options, I think having competition is great. It's better for the consumer to have competition, and the government will be a lot more efficient and a lot quicker to try to fix things if there's private competition. So for example, this is just an idea, if it's $80 that's covered under OHIP and the private doctor's charging $100 or $90 or $120, you would pay the difference, I would pay the difference out of pocket if I wanted that option, but you're definitely covered, you have universal health care. We're not United States of America. This is very important that we have people that need help that can get the help that they need. That's my idea from the PPC.
Mr. Morris on the national doctor shortage.
Yeah, thank you. So this is something I've heard from so many across our community over the last number of months. It's the doctor shortage, along with the concerns around the standard of care as the population ages, at a time when we don't have appropriate mental health support or dental or pharmacare. But to start by answering the question, Raj is right. There is nothing specifically in the Green Party platform on number of physician ratio. However, this is actually part of why I chose to run with the Green Party. As I mentioned earlier, Greens encourage their members of Parliament to put their community first and party second. And that means that as our MP, given the number of people for whom this is a major concern in our community, I would continue to be an advocate and working right across party lines to address the shortage of family physicians in our community, and to do so through the tools the federal government has, for example, the Canada Health Transfer, working with provincial and municipal partners. While alongside that, I want to be sure, if we're talking healthcare, this might be our only chance to do so in this particular conversation. It is not only the physician shortage, it's the number of people in our community who are concerned around dental, that are concerned around pharmacare, and it's mental health in particular, that we're letting down so many across our community. It's 1 in 5 Canadians, not over the course of their lifetime, but every year, who work through a mental health challenge. And that's when we talk about investing and expanding on our health care. That's what I'd be representing our community well on in Ottawa. Thank you.
Mr. Moraga and then Mr. Saini after.
I would just like to bring up a point. So you always talk about how you're a pharmacist, and I know that you have owned or currently still do own a pharmacy in town. So is it not a conflict of interest if you're working on legislation related to pharmacare that could or could not directly enrich yourself? And so if you do still own that pharmacy, would you divest yourself from said pharmacy to make sure that Canadians know and people in Kitchener Centre know that you're making decisions based on our own interest? And I would pose the same question to Mike. It's my understanding that you have environment businesses. So if you do own or have stocks or funds invested in the environment, would you divest yourself of those so that Canadians know that you're not enriching yourself off of their tax dollars? Thank you.
Mr. Saini, response?
Absolutely. The only time you have to do that is if you're a cabinet minister and you put your funds in a blind trust. So you're absolutely right on that point. Number 2, can I respond to Mr. Woodworth? Or?
Yeah, I'll allow that.
Okay.
Yep.
So, I don't know where Mr. Woodworth gets his numbers from, but there were 24 academics who analyzed our 2015 platform, and they concluded that almost 92 to 93% of those platform commitments were completed. His party, right now, is the only party that has not released their full platform. There's a leaders' debate tonight, and even their full platform has not been released. Their full platform has not been costed. We are the only political party whose platform has been costed and has been fully released. So I would want him to make sure that when he says something, and when he talks about the escalator rise when it comes to healthcare, we've actually increased it to 3.5%. Thank you.
Mr. Morris, I'll get you to respond to Mr. Moraga, and then we'll come to Mr. Woodworth to conclude.
Sure. So to be clear, I've started 2 not-for-profits. They are Sustainable Waterloo Region, which I led for 5 years, and then Green Economy Canada, which I started to share the model that we started here in Waterloo Region. I have left both those organizations in order to be fully committed to this process since December of last year. And as a not-for-profit, there were no funds, there's no retained earnings. I was never a shareholder. I was on the board of Sustainable Waterloo Region originally, and no longer am. Just to briefly comment on the platform costing, the Green Platform is the platform with the largest number of items in the budget that have been costed out, of that, it's been reviewed twice now by both the PBO and by a third party, and with additional background information, received strong support from that third party as well. Thank you.
Mr. Woodworth, quickly to respond to Mr. Saini, and then we'll conclude with Mr. Saini.
Thank you. I sat on a stage at a chamber debate 4 years ago with Mr. Saini the day after the Liberal platform, fully costed, was released, only to have the next morning a $3 billion new commitment added onto it to address home care. The fact of the matter is that the Conservative platform will be totally rolled out well before the election, and every commitment that's been made by Andrew Scheer has been made with costing figures attached to it. You can look that up on our platform online. Thank you.
Mr. Saini, to conclude.
The only thing I want to say is that when you create a platform, the platform has to be fully costed and it has to make sense. The Green Party platform received a failing grade the first time it was put through, not only by the PBO, but an ex-PBO officer who runs a fiscal management institute. They put the numbers back in again, they got a bare pass, but in terms of fiscal responsibility, they had a fail. So if you're gonna go to Canadians and talk about things that you want to do, they have to make financial and fiscal sense first. If they don't, then you really don't have a plan to implement. And that's the biggest test of any political party, is making sure that their platform makes sense and is fiscally responsible. And right now, the only political party whose platform is fiscally responsible, according to the PBO, is the Liberal Party of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, I got to move on.
Check. So the PBO doesn't do pass and fails. The parliamentary budget officer only reviews and then shares back what they saw. For example, in the Green Platform, pharmacare is fully costed out. It is this third party, it was Kevin Page, the former parliamentary budget officer, who reviewed it the first time, wasn't satisfied the first time. Additional background documents were provided by the Green Party, and he was satisfied the second time, and it passed the second time. It's all available online.
Yeah, please look it up online and watch the language.
Thank you. Moving on. As you know, public transit is a major issue for all of our municipalities across Waterloo Region and Canada. All-day two-way GO passenger service is critical for the Toronto-Waterloo Region corridor. Do you support this goal, and will you work with the Connect the Corridor Coalition to make this happen? And to respond first, Mr. Saini.
Absolutely, I would work with Connect the Corridor. Actually, in April of 2017, I was the MP who made the announcement on $750 million for two-way all-day GO. And we were working with the provincial government at the time to do an environmental assessment to smooth things over between Kitchener and Toronto. The completion date was supposed to be 2024, and we were working along until the new provincial government came in and canceled it. So it was in process with the previous government. We had a strong understanding that we would invest in public transit, including two-way all-day GO, because when I was elected, that was one of the first things that people came to me with. A couple of other things, but that was the biggest thing, that we need two-way all-day GO. And I spent a year and a half working on that file. Finally, we got the federal government and the provincial government to agree. In April of 2017, I made the announcement personally for our commitment of $750 million. Then we started the environmental assessment impacts that had to go. We were fixing the train and the tracks, and all of a sudden the government changed in Ontario, and they cut it. So I think the question should be to the Ford Conservatives is, do they believe in public? Because we believe in public transit, and we made the commitment to do it. Thank you.
Mr. Woodworth, on the two-way all-day GO passenger.
Yes, thank you very much. It is a file that I worked on hard when I was a member of Parliament, and we were making steady progress, harmonizing the track, dealing with the private owners of the railways so that we could get that train moving efficiently, dealing with CP, getting their freight off the line. I'm really looking forward to returning to that work. And let me take this opportunity to say that I compliment Mr. Saini on picking that up and carrying the ball since he's been elected. He and I are like this when it comes to our support for all-day two-way GO transit between Kitchener and Toronto. That's an essential thing for the growth of our community. I only hope that if I return to Parliament, we will have a Prime Minister that will know how to get along with the Ontario government and not one who just keeps sticking it to them. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier, will your party work with Connect the Corridor to make two-way all-day GO happen between Toronto and Waterloo Region?
Absolutely. Our party is a party of, the PPC is the party of consensus, the party of working together and finding solutions together. We also can't stress enough the benefit private enterprise and private citizens and everybody brings to the table. That's why reducing taxes is key to that too, and helping and not subsidizing companies like Bombardier and all sorts of other companies that prop up the prices for everybody. We want to make sure that we build more and more. I mean, even this Hyperloop, if anyone's heard of that, these are all very interesting ideas, all great ideas that we want to see more of, connecting everyone from coast to coast.
Mr. Morris, two-way all-day GO?
Well, yes, of course. because we've been waiting for this for years. I think it's embarrassing that it still takes upwards of 3 hours. You got to stop at Mount Pleasant and hope the next GO train might pick you up, or you might get the 918 via. If we're going to make progress on both productivity, increase the economic health of our region, and take real action on climate change, this is one of the obvious wins that hits all of those. And that's why I'm not only supportive of two-way all-day GO, but of high-speed rail. The study for high-speed rail has already been done. So many across our community are calling for this. Yes, there's an investment involved. It's a $4 billion investment from Kitchener to Toronto. It would get you there in 48 minutes, and it would cost us less than it costs us to buy a pipeline. So it's about time we get our priorities straight and focus on where folks across our community are calling for investment, and the connection from Kitchener to Toronto is it.
Mr. Moraga, on 2 all day GO.
Of course I support Of course I support all two-way all-day GO, like my provincial counterparts in Catherine Fife and Laura May Lindo, who have been pushing for two-way all-day GO. They've been holding the Ford government accountable and asking why we have not gotten these things. And it's obviously gotten us somewhere, because we have two-way all-day-ish GO service, and that's a step in the right direction, but we need fully two-way all-day GO. And that's what the NDP believes in. We believe in making sure that our communities are connected, not just to Toronto, but to each other, so that people can make choices that are the most economical to them. Having a car is great, and some people will still want to own one, but for young people, it's becoming increasingly unaffordable to maintain a vehicle. And if we have strong public transit, that's a choice that we don't have to make. We believe in expanding public transit so that within cities people can get around, expanding regional transit so that people can get back and forth, and electrifying it wherever possible to reduce those emissions. And I know in some areas it's not practical to electrify the rail, but there are still technologies that we have that are proven, like hydrogen trains. There's a lot of technologies out there, and we can't wait for some magical one to appear. We have all the tools that we need right now. I'm a scientist. I know that we know the problem. We have the solutions. We just need brave politicians to bring forth courageous policies that focus on what people need and make sure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Mr. Saini to respond to all day GO.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad Mike raised this point on high-speed rail, because I think it's an excellent point. And the former premier made this announcement in Kitchener at the Google building that they were going to start the introductory study for high-speed rail. So there were two tracks that were working. One was a two-day, all-day GO. The other one was the high-speed rail, because he's right. It would have taken 48 minutes. Two-way, all-day GO takes an hour and 23 minutes. But I want the people here to understand one thing, that in March of 2018, we signed a bilateral agreement with the province of Ontario to invest $12 billion in public transit. Premier Ford came into office in June of 2018. Until almost July of 2019, not one single public transit or infrastructure project was brought forward by the provincial government. 1 year was wasted because he did not, try to alleviate the situation that could have been alleviated. 1 year he took. So when Mr. Woodward says that, you got to work with a partner, well, you need a partner to work with. We were at the table at the beginning. Here's a list of projects. Let's get this done. We barely got the bus maintenance facility done in August of this year. Finally, they opened up the intake. This is the problem. When you have a problem with the provincial premiers, 6 of them who are conservative now, who want to stop progress, who want to stop advancement, who want to stop the building of an infrastructure, you need a strong federal partner, you need a strong federal government to make sure that these projects get built. Two-way all-day GO should have been in process. It should have been in play. By 2024, 5 years it should have been done. High-speed rail, the introductory investigation should have been completed by now. We should have been talking about that. But when you don't have a provincial partner, it's very difficult. And I share your frustration, Mike. This should have been in play. We had the money at the table. I made the announcement. I was there when the premier made the announcement. And that's why it's very important to make sure that you have a strong federal government that can stand up to the premiers who don't want to get anything done in this country. Thank you.
Mr. Moraga to respond, and then I'll come to Mr. Woodworth for the final word.
NDP is very much in favor of high-speed rail, and so am I. But something we have to remember is that right now along that corridor, that's going to mean the expropriations of a lot of farmland. We have to stop building on farmland that we need to feed our families and our country, and we have to stop putting all this pressure on rural communities. We need to make sure that if we did want to build a high-speed rail, that we are looking at the routes that have the least amount of impact to farmland and to rural communities. And I think it also comes down to cooperation and making sure that we're not making promises for 2 or 3 mandates away. Why do I have to vote you in 2 or 3 more times before I get what you promised me the first time? Where are the plans for the 4 years that you have to make a difference? We were promised a lot of things and we didn't see them. So the high-speed rail was supposed to come about in 2026. That is, there was an election in 2018, there's another one in 2022, and there should be another one in 2026. That is 3 elections away that we would see high-speed rail. And we know that things are delayed anyways with construction because things never go according to plan. So these promises that are being made, I don't want to hear about them 2 or 3 mandates away. The NDP's promises, yes, we're looking at over 10 years, but we also talk about we're going to build this much housing in 4 years. We are going to make sure that it is split evenly among multiple mandates to make sure that people are getting what we promised and we're not pushing it away 2, 3, 5 mandates away.
Mr. Woodworth, 2A all day go.
Thank you very much. I really just couldn't believe my ears to hear Mr. Saini trashing not just Doug Ford now, but 6 provincial premiers. How does Mr. Saini think he's going to work with his provincial member of parliament, provincial parliament counterparts here in Waterloo Region after doing that? I tell you, the way to get along with people is not to stand up in front of a camera and run them down and trash them. If you got a beef with somebody, you take it behind closed doors, you express yourself, you find a way to work with them. And you certainly don't go at it on a my way or the highway approach, the way that Mr. Trudeau has approached the provinces, not only on infrastructure spending, but on medical care, on the carbon tax, and on any number of other issues. We really, really need to get past that. We can't make it a partisan issue, as Mr. Saini would have you do, 6 conservative premiers against a Liberal Prime Minister. This is not a partisan matter. We have to take it past that. Thank you.
Mr. Saini to respond and conclude.
I have a problem when my community or my province is suffering because of the ideology of the premier in the province. The reason I mentioned 6 premiers is because it's 6 premiers that fought the government in court to prevent us from putting a price on pollution. That's affecting my country. That's affecting my community. If they wanted to debate us, they could. But they went purposely, sued the federal government knowing that it was a federal jurisdiction when it came to the environment. They sued us, and what did Ford do then when he lost the lawsuit? He produces all these stickers and sticks them on the what do you call those things? Where you
Gas station.
gas pumps, whatever, right? So this is the issue.
The things the rest of us use.
This is the issue, right? When premiers are going to stop the progress of the country, yeah, I'm going to be mad. Yeah, I'm going to be angry. Infrastructure, railways, 2A all day go, price on pollution. That's reducing and regressing our ability to succeed in the future.
Thank you. Via Rail is an agency of the federal government and supplies passenger service on the Sarnia to Toronto line, which stops in Kitchener. Again, on the transportation file, what has your party proposed to increase Via service just west of Toronto? And to start that discussion, Mr. Woodworth.
Quite frankly, I can tell you I don't recall anything in our party platform about Via Rail. I think that what I know is from my previous experience as a member of Parliament, and it all relates to the 2-way all-day GO train between Kitchener and Toronto, and I don't think I can say too much more about that, other than to speculate that in any government in Canada in this day and age, as our population continues to concentrate and focus particularly in the Windsor to Montreal corridor, it's going to become inevitable that we have to improve our rail service. It is going to become inevitable that we have to find better ways to move people in that corridor. So I don't think a Conservative government is going to ignore those inevitabilities any more than anyone else. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier and Via Rail service.
Via rail, I'm without a mandate to be, saying yes or no. I will say personally, competition is good for everybody, reducing taxes, more people vying to try to build rails or come up with solutions, alternate transport solutions. These are all things that the PPC is about: consensus, consultation, and we know what we think, but we want to hear what you think.
Mr. Morris, on Via Rail service.
Well, as someone who uses Via Rail on a regular basis, I'm glad to see that both the Green Party is strongly supportive of investing in Via Rail, strengthening our passenger rail service across the country. There's a specific $600 million commitment in 2020 on Via Rail specifically. I wanted to check out the second one, $720 million more by 2023. But more importantly, in our community, it's about making sure we have the connectivity links
area. That corridor is the most populous part of our province. Why don't we have high-frequency rail already? Why do we not have high-speed rail? You know that in North America, we don't have a single high-speed rail line. We're a joke to the rest of the world on that front. And that goes towards helping us reduce our carbon emissions, because you don't need to fly from Montreal to Toronto if you can get there in about the same time or a little bit more on the train. So we believe in supporting that so it's affordable for people, it's accessible, and that there are choices. How amazing would it be to live in Montreal and work in Toronto and be able to go back and forth every day the same way you would taking the 401? And, we can invest limitless amounts into expanding a highway. The worst feeling is when you're sitting there why is there so much traffic? Why can't anybody drive? And then you realize, oh my God, I'm traffic. I'm part of it. And we need to be giving people other choices. I believe in choices. And it means that you don't have to own a car if you don't want to. You don't have to spend, purchase a decreasing asset and make these types of choices. You should put all your money where you want it, which is in living a good life, supporting your friends and family, and doing the things that you want to do. Thank you.
Mr. Saini, increasing Via Rail service.
So we made the announcement in June of this year that we were going to invest $71 million in a dedicated, faster dedicated line between Montreal and Toronto. So we are already beginning the process of that investment.
Okay, thank you. Climate change is a concern for the business community, just as it is for all Canadians. Many municipalities are passing a resolution saying there is a climate crisis. Please make your case for your party's policy approach to the environment. And to begin discussion on this one, Mr. Bernier from the People's Party of Canada.
The environment. Contrary to popular belief, the PPC supports renewable energy. The PPC supports private enterprise, private citizens making everyday changes towards what's best for the environment and for them. These are choices that we all make. It's about personal accountability. It's about having more money in your pocket so you can spend and support the businesses that you believe in. Climate emergency is an interesting concept. It's definitely a priority, and of all the people I spoke to this campaign, and that's a lot of people, climate was number 3 on their wish list. Affordability, opioid crisis, homelessness, disenfranchisement, these were huge humanitarian crises. Now, the city of Kitchener, interestingly, when we were out at 6 a.m. talking to some people, it's pretty scary out there. There's a guy with no fingers searching the grates of Kitchener for hope. It's scary. And there's a Ronnie, and there's a lot of people living out of shopping carts. This is a humanitarian crisis. This is a horror show downtown Kitchener that we need as people here to be accountable for and help out.
Mr. Bernier, does this relate to your climate crisis plan?
Absolutely. It's talking about the city of Kitchener driving around, watering flowers with 2 engines, 2 trucks in the morning. If it's a climate emergency, why is the government increasing emissions, so to speak, or why is the government using energy? So this is a fascinating world that we're living in right now, where everyone's talking about how everybody needs to be better and do better. Why don't we start with ourselves and every day take action? We know what we need to do. Mr. Moraga said that all the solutions are already there. We don't need the government to tell us. And maybe you could write a blog, actually, and tell us what we need to do, because that's what we want. Every day, small actions. That's how we're going to change. That's how we're going to get the climate in a sustainable fashion and energy, and that's how we're going to fix everything.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, on climate change?
Well, we need to start by following and listening to what scientists and young people, Indigenous leaders, and economists are telling us. And that means following through at the scale of the crisis we face. This is the last chance we've got, is what the International Panel on Climate Change has told us. Since 1992 in Rio, we've had decades now of inaction from political leaders in our country and around the world. Right now, our current government has a target to reduce carbon by 30% by 2030. The starting point would be to follow the science and set a target of 60% by 2030, going to net neutral by 2050, and then to have a science-based plan to back it up. That starts with having an inter-party cabinet working across party lines. Climate change shouldn't be a partisan issue. This should be all 338 parliamentarians working together. Once you've got the target right, well, then you can implement the plans to then follow through, ending the subsidies to fossil fuels, rather than buying a pipeline, using those kinds of investment to invest in a renewable grid across the country, invest in retrofitting buildings across the country, and yes, creating jobs while we do it, shifting to electric vehicles, shifting to the economy of the future at the scale required. This is why I and others have been talking about a Green New Deal, an economic mobilization at the scale of the challenge, and ensuring that no one is left behind while we do it. Ensuring that we're creating the dignified jobs of tomorrow while capturing this moment together. This is not about one generation or another. It's about coming together as Canadians to show the leadership that we ought to be showing on the world stage, to follow the science on climate change, and to really build the economy of the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moraga, your plan on climate change for your party?
Of course, thank you. So I'm an environmental scientist and I'm a young person, so as everyone has said, please listen to me. You know, I've been studying the environment for a decade. I know sometimes I look younger than I am. I'm approaching 30 now, so I'm halfway through my doctorate at the University of Waterloo, where I study ecological restoration. My research has contributed to, at times, the greenhouse gas inventory that we submit to the UN every year. That's what the Canadian government does. I've looked at how do we mitigate human impact to the environment, and how do we restore environments that we destroy after industrial activities, after mining, after all of those things. So I see the impacts firsthand, and I literally get in the dirt with my hiking boots. I pick up the plants, I pick up the bugs, sometimes I run away from snakes. That's what my job is. And I can see that, you know, conservative governments muzzled us. They didn't listen to us. The Liberal government is still not listening to Canadians. I was part of a group of 1,600 early career researchers across Canada who asked Justin Trudeau to make sure that their policies are evidence-based and to stop using us as a smokescreen, because we believe in the evidence and we believe in the facts. Like I said earlier, we know the problem, we have the solutions, we just need brave policy. I didn't want to sit in my lab anymore and watch the Titanic sink when I knew that I could tell everyone there's an iceberg coming and we just need to change course. That's why the NDP's plan is focused on a Green New Deal, a plan that was brought forward by a young woman of color in America named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But the unique thing about it is that it was focused on social and economic justice. And justice is the key word, because we have been leaving people behind since the founding of Canada. What about struggling families? What about low-income people? People who are struggling with addiction? What about Indigenous communities? What about people of color? We have to make sure that our plans are focused on them. An NDP Green New Deal means good jobs for everyone. It means a clean economy. It means investing in our people, because we know that's what makes our country strong and our economy strong. And I've spoken to business leaders and farmers and people across the board. They want these policies, but right now, a choice for the environment is a punitive choice, because you have to pick between survival and making a responsible decision. That's obviously not a choice, because we would all pick to survive. And we need to stop forcing that decision on people and make sure that these policies don't force them to choose between doing the right thing and surviving. That's what the NDP believes in. That is what we've always believed in, and we will always be here to support everyday people. Thank you.
Mr. Saini, your party's climate change plan?
So let's look at what we've done so far between 2015 and 2019. We put 53 pan-Canadian projects in place. We put a price on pollution. We put in one of the most comprehensive ocean protection plans, where before only 1% of our coastal waters were protected. Now it's raised to 14%. We want to get to 25% by 2025 and ultimately 30% by 2030. We will ban single-use plastics by 2021. We're going to phase out coal by 2030, and we're making unprecedented investments in public transit projects across the country. But what are we going to do going forward? We're going to retrofit 1.5 million homes across this country. That means that any homeowner or landlord can get a free energy audit. They take a look at their home, and if they can't afford it, we were going to give them a $40,000 interest-free loan for up to 10 years to make sure that they can renovate or rehabilitate their property. We're going to go to a net zero emissions economy by 2050. We're going to make sure we could plant 2 billion trees in 10 years. We have given a $5,000 rebate on zero emissions vehicles. We've cut the corporate income tax in half to incentivize companies to make sure that they come up with a new product of tomorrow. But ladies and gentlemen, you know, rhetoric is one thing, but you got to look at the platform. That's what the key is. You got to look at the platform and the independent analysis that economists and environmentalists have done. There was a recent article in Chatelaine magazine that rated every party's platform. It was done by an economist and environmentalist. And there were 2 to 3 conclusions that came out of there. The best platform for the most feasible and achievable climate plan was the Liberal Party of Canada. The worst was the Conservative Party of Canada, and slightly better than them was the Green Party of Canada. Having a platform, making sure it's well costed, making sure it's well researched, is imperative to making sure that we achieve the targets we want to achieve. And the 2030 targets, according to economists and environmentalists, we're already 3/4 of the way there. So I want to make this clear. Do your own research. Don't believe what we're saying. Do your own research. Look at the studies that are out there. Look at the media reports, because they've done all the analysis. So I just want to make clear, because here I'm hearing a lot of rhetoric. I'm not hearing a lot of platform commitments. We should be doing this and we should be doing that, but it's not in the platform. So I want to make sure that you know that everything we're trying to do is in our platform. Thank you.
Mr. Woodworth, on your climate change plan for your party?
Thank you very much. I'm going to find myself in agreement with Mr. Saini again in a small way, and that is you do have to look at platforms. Now, I have no idea what environmental or economic expertise the editors at Chatelaine have, and so I do invite you to go to arealplan.ca, the conservative environmental platform. We, in fact, have 65 detailed environmental initiatives, too many to mention in a short answer here, and I hope you'll carefully read them all. But here are a few important points. First of all, conservatives accept the emission targets under the Paris Agreement. It was actually a conservative government that set those targets for Canada. The issue is not about whether we think there's a problem or not. Of course there's a problem. It's an important and a serious problem. The issue is, what do we do about it? Are we going to be stampeded by the politics of fear and panic into adopting extreme solutions like those offered by the Green Party? No. In fact, we can meet our targets without making life any harder for ordinary families and without throwing tens of thousands of Canadians out of work. The next point is that although meeting our targets is important and Canada will get the job done, doing that just won't stop climate change, which is the issue that my constituents are concerned about. Even eliminating 100% of Canada's 1.6% contribution to global emissions will not stop climate change. That's why our platform proposes taking Canadian technology global, where Canada can really make a difference. I'd like to give you a very big example. With close to 3,000 coal plants, if China fitted even just their top 100 plants with Canadian carbon capture and storage technology, they could eliminate more than 300 megatons of CO2 emissions per year. That's nearly half of what Canada's entire economy produces. We can be very proud of Canada's world-class achievements, innovations, and technologies. We should export them. The government should support them. That's what Conservatives propose, sensible policies, and I hope they'll appeal to you. Thank you.
Mr. Morris, in response to the climate change plan?
Yeah, just actually two brief ones. This argument about our emissions being low, so we shouldn't take action on climate change, I've heard so many times before. When I was in front of the City of Kitchener's Council years ago with our community's first ever climate change plan, one of the councillors raised this same point. And what I've seen in the years since is, as our community has led with one of the boldest and most ambitious climate change plans, is not only can we demonstrate that we can take action in our community, but we can inspire others by our community taking action, and we then have a leg to stand on as we work with other levels of government. And so I don't agree with this line of thinking to belittle any amount of emissions or any small action. Because with any small action, you can both inspire others, and then you got a position to then have a conversation, a leading conversation with other countries around the world. On the point of this article in Chatelain's, and I'll agree, I'm not sure they're the most preeminent climate scientists, but to address the point, to just fact check. So the point made is correct. The Liberal plan received an A on feasibility, but a B on ambition. So they said, yes, it's a feasible plan that doesn't really show the ambition we need. The Green Party plan, again, the fact check, received an A+ on ambition, and on feasibility, a C, a minus. And so when I look at that, I think, you know what? That's what we actually need at this time. We need a high order of ambition. You know what? If we'd gotten our act together 20 years ago, maybe a B level of ambition would have been good enough. But given where we're at right now, the scientists are telling us we need an A+ on ambition, and we need parliamentarians who are going to work together to figure out the feasibility at such a critical moment in time. The plan is called Mission Possible. It's a 20-point climate plan. You can find it online.
Mr. Woodworth, you wanted to rebut Mr. Morris as well as Mr. Saini and Mr. Bernier?
Thank you. I know Mr. Morris. I like him, and I'm going to put this down to simply an innocent mistake on his part, not listening to what I said, because I, for one, certainly didn't say our emissions are low, therefore we shouldn't take climate change seriously. I said exactly the opposite. I said we have to take climate change seriously. We have to deal with our emissions. But the fact that our emissions, Canadian emissions, are so low means we have to go more than that. We've got to go global. We have to go to the real source of the problem. That's what I tried to say. Not Mr. Morris, I think, I hope innocently just mischaracterized it.
Mr. Saini, response?
So I'll respond first to Mr. Morris, and I agree with the first part. I'll come back to the second part. When I mentioned the feasibility, ambition is great, but you need a plan. If you don't have a plan that's costed, you won't reach that ambition. But I appreciate Mike's first point when he talked about the 1.6%, because the Conservatives continually say that 1.6, it doesn't make a difference because China is going to supersede that in 1 month.
That's not
well,
what
we're
I said.
still, a lot of Conservatives have said that. But the other issue is, though, we are one of the top 10 carbon emitting countries in the world, even at 1.6%, and we have the highest per carbon emittance per capita around the world. But Mr. Morris is right. We have to have ambition when it comes to solving this problem. I look back in the 30s and 40s when Canada had a small population, yet 2 researchers discovered insulin. They could have said at that time, we have a small country, how many diabetics do we have? But that invention saved millions upon millions of lives. When I look at the Ebola virus, Ebola doesn't happen in Canada, it happens in West Africa. But the researcher who discovered the cure to the Ebola virus, the vaccine, he's Canadian. He didn't have to do that. We have one of the most advanced research institutions in the world. This is an issue for all of us. This is not a Canadian issue. But we have a moral responsibility, being in an advanced country, having committed and created this environment where countries that don't have anything to do, have never emitted that much carbon, are now suffering. If you look at what happened in Bahamas, if you look at Pacific Island states that are sinking through no fault of their own, the fault of the West, we have some moral responsibility. And I agree with Mike. As Canadians, it's up to us not only to solve the problem here, but but to spread that technology around the world so those countries that don't have the ability to do their own research or don't have the ability to come up with their own technology, that we should be doing that. And when the Conservatives say they're going to cut 25% in international aid, and Mr. Bernier likes that too, well, part of that international aid is to make sure that those countries that are suffering from climate change have the resources they need to build more climate resilient infrastructure, have the ability to make sure that they make changes in their own country to protect from future floods and hurricanes and disasters. So that's why international aid is important. It's not about us, it's not about them, it's about all of us, and we're all in this together. Thank you.
Mr. Moraga, I know you wanted to respond, and Mr. Bernier as well, so we'll get to both of you, and then we'll conclude.
Okay. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Saini's earlier comment about not talking about the platform and the policy. I mean, I figure that doesn't always do well with conversation, but let's talk about it. So the NDP has a plan to make sure that we stick to the Paris Climate Agreement of maintaining global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, we're already at 1.1 degrees, so we have a lot of work to do. The IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has said we have about 10 to 11 years to act aggressively to reduce climate change and to reduce carbon emissions. So we have a plan to do that. Our plan is listening to the voices of scientists, it's listening to the voices of young people, and it's listening to the voices of Canadians by saying we don't want to choose between survival and the environment. So we have a plan to retrofit homes and buildings. We have a plan to make sure that we increase production of zero emissions vehicles in Canada to support our auto manufacturing sector. We want to expand and electrify public transit. We want to make sure that we're investing in clean tech and innovation. Canada is one of the world's premier places when it comes to research innovation. So let's support that and make sure that we are exporting that, as Mr. Woodworth said, to make sure that Canada's economy is strong. And we want to take it further and make sure that we are protecting 30% of the land, sea, and freshwater to make sure that those areas are protected to continue storing carbon and storing it for many generations so that we can, A, enjoy that area, but B, take advantage of those environmental services. And there's a lot of opportunities to look at what the environment is already doing for us, quantify it, and make sure that we protect it for more reasons just than its beauty, but also to all the benefits that it gives us. So as Canadians, we should show leadership and take responsibility for the carbon emissions that we've given to the atmosphere and take action. And saying that China or India or other countries are not acting responsibly is not true. China has added more solar panels in a single year than the rest of the world combined. So I think we have to take a cue from China and from India, who are taking this very seriously despite coming to the economic game late, and follow through, showing that we are also strong and that we also will commit to this action. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier, climate change?
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Moraga. We need to take care of people. And some of the worst polluters are big government-controlled countries. 12,800 more than, that's a big number. And that's more than 24,000 mothers and fathers for those who are gone. And climate change is real. It's real for those in the street tonight and for the winter. These are real climate emergencies. The other ones are priorities. We need to really get together and help out. And as an elected official, that's the most important job, to take care of the community, and that will spread across Canada, coast to coast.
Mr. Woodworth?
Thank you very much. I'm not going to give Mr. Saini the benefit of the doubt I gave to Mr. Morris, because Mr. Saini deliberately has misrepresented Conservative policy on climate change. Look in our platform. You'll see that what I've told you is the truth. The Conservative Party treats climate change and carbon emissions very seriously, and it's just a smear to say that, well, maybe Woodworth doesn't, but a lot of Conservatives don't. That's not what is in our platform, and if Mr. Saini wants to go back and look at platforms, he'll see that in the Conservative platform.
Mr. Saini, to conclude?
The reason I mention that is because there's been no environmentalist, to my mind, who so far has said that the Conservatives have a good climate plan. The reason I mentioned the Chatelaine article is because two leading researchers, one in economics and one in environmental science, wrote their article in Chatelaine. It's not Chatelaine's article, they wrote it in Chatelaine, and they graded everybody's platform, and they said clearly that with the climate plan that the Conservatives have, emissions could possibly go up. That's all I stated. I didn't say anybody said it. I just said that that's the conservative plan, that emissions might possibly go up. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Canada needs immigration to fuel our economic prosperity. There are literally thousands of jobs unfilled in Waterloo Region as we speak. If elected, will you support policies that enable more employers to hire more immigrants suited to their positions faster? And how will you support immigrants already in the community to find work? And to begin the discussion, Mr. Moraga from the NDP.
Thank you so much for the question. The NDP believes in supporting immigrants and making sure that we have the skilled labor force that we need to make our economy strong and to make our business strong. In Canada, the replacement rate of native-born Canadians, which updates every generation with new immigrants, is only like 1.4. Which means that without immigration, our population would collapse, and so would our economy. So immigrants bring a strength to our country, not just for the skills that they bring, but also for the rich cultural traditions that enrich all of our lives. We believe in making sure that immigrants have access to the supports that they need, have access to a fair, dignified, and respectful immigration system, and making sure that businesses have top priority in finding the skilled labor that they need. We support immigration, we support business, and we want to make sure that everybody has the labor that they need, and also in training Canadians where possible to fill that gap. But we can't do it alone. We need to work and make sure that we are opening up that system so that skilled immigrants are coming in and having their credentials recognized. I don't know about you, but I've met a lot of immigrants from countries who are working jobs you would not expect. They have PhDs in electrical engineering. They were medical doctors in their previous home country, and those credentials are not being recognized when they move here. Those people are emigrating as economic immigrants, and we are missing out on those skills. We have a shortage of doctors. Why are we not recognizing those credentials? So a new Democratic government will support immigration, but even without government, we've seen that the NDP can be very powerful in a minority position. When we brought us healthcare in the late 60s, early 70s, the NDP has always been on the side of the people, and we always will be. Every single vote, every single voice that comes to us is more strength through our community and is more representation for the people. Thank you.
Mr. Saini, how will your party enable more employers to hire immigrants?
I'm extremely glad you asked this question, because we took action immediately upon forming government. One of the first things we heard when there's a global competition for talent, in Canada at that time, it would take almost 6 months to hire somebody that was around the world. And a lot of companies had found talented people that had certain skill sets that some Canadians didn't have for whatever reason, and they were either in France or Italy or Germany or Brazil or India or wherever, and they were taking 6 months actually to get their immigration approved, going through lawyers, money on forms, all this stuff, and still within 6 months they weren't even sure whether this person could come here or not. So what do? We launched the Global Skills Strategy. In 10 business days, any employer will find out immediately whether the person is eligible to come to Canada or not. We created a business hub to streamline this process so that if there is global talent around the world that needs to come to Canada, 10 days, they can come. But there's something also very important, because there's some political parties that want to reduce immigration. And I think that if we look at statistically, in 20 years, 1 in 5 Canadians is going to be over 65. Our demographic curve is also already becoming more slender. We have this great opportunity, we have this great reputation of welcoming Canadians here and making sure they settle. We've decided that we are going to increase the immigration rate up to 350,000 people, with a heavy emphasis on economic immigration, but also making sure that we also create a space for refugees also and family reunification. But more importantly, right now, as a country, we need to be able to attract the best and the brightest continuously. Canada is not the only place that people can go. But because of our nature, because of our strong sense of identity, because of our multicultural system in this country, because of our way of welcoming foreigners who come to our shores, we have the best position right now in the world to globally not only attract talent, but to retain that talent and utilize that talent for the betterment of all society. And when it comes to foreign credentialing, I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the last budget, we put in $27 million every year to make sure that people who came here from around the world had an opportunity, because it was very expensive, to get their credentials analyzed. The only problem is with some professions, like the medical profession, a lot of them are provincially regulated, and so there has been that gap. That's why the family doctor program that we started was to work with provinces to incentivize more spaces so doctors who come from other parts of the world could have their credentials analyzed, but then there would be a residency space for them. So it's a two-step process. But we have already looked into that, and we're going to do that, and that was part of the $6 billion in the physician, increasing physicians in Canada. Thank you.
Mr. Woodworth, on your plan to employ more immigrants?
Thank you very much. I'll start by just reminding people that under the former Conservative government, we were making real strides to improve our immigration system. We were reducing backlogs. We were dealing with the issues around temporary foreign workers taking jobs away from Canadians. We were funding the necessary supports for new Canadians. But you know what? In 4 years, the Trudeau Liberals have just not only undone the previous progress made by the Conservative government to strengthen our immigration system, but they've actually managed in 4 years to undermine the long-standing Canadian consensus that immigration is indeed a positive thing for our country. You know, with baby boomers retiring, we're going to need the world's best and brightest to choose Canada. And immigration, done right, is good for the economy, good for jobs, and good for the people who come to Canada. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to safeguard and emphasize economic immigration. We're going to stand up for families to ensure that spouses and children can be reunited. We're going to improve language training to ensure greater proficiency in English and French and newcomers' ability to succeed economically and socially. We're going to match the support we give to settle newcomers with the number of newcomers that arrive in Canada. It's all out of whack right now. I spoke to a teacher a few weeks ago who said she's got children in her class who are new Canadians who do not have the support they need. We have to rejig that and match the funds to the people we admit. We will improve credential recognition, make it easier for new Canadians who have existing skills that meet our standards to work here. We all lose out when doctors and engineers are not able to practice their profession. We're also going to ensure that our system prioritizes people who are facing persecution. Focus government sponsorship on the victims of the 4 atrocity crimes and restore integrity to our system by supporting the consistent application of fair rules. We'll work to reunite survivors of genocide who've already settled in Canada, like the Yazidis. That motion was defeated in Parliament. We want to do more to promote private sponsorship of refugees. We'll put an end to illegal border crossing crisis by closing the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement that allows some people to skip the line and avoid the queue. And I could go on, many more sensible policies which I hope you'll support. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier, how will your party support employing more immigrants?
The PPC supports up to 150,000 new Canadians under a system equipped to identify, way better equipped, to identify the best candidates for the job. Our focus is economic new Canadians. Right now, the way it is that 80% of new Canadians are dependent Canadians. We're focusing on having that flip so that 80% are positive contribution, which is what we all need as a community right now. We want to focus on private sponsorship instead of government sponsorship of new Canadians coming here who will be dependent. We want to put that focus also on the private. We also want to stop the flow of irregular crossings, stop the flow of illegal guns, and stop the flow, so it'll serve 2 purposes. This is the main PPC idea, because emissions also, if you think about it, 350,000 new Canadians, that's Kitchener Waterloo, that's a lot of emissions. So right now what we're doing is we're taking a temporary step back, reorganizing. The world is becoming one, which is awesome in a lot of ways. So we have to have a system in place so that we don't end up like Europe. We've got to get a system that identifies the best candidates for the job, a focus on economic new Canadians. We support positive contribution.
Mr. Morris, how will your party support finding new jobs for new Canadians?
Well, let me start by just a bit of a fact check here. So almost 60% of current immigrants across the country are already economic immigrants, high-skilled immigrants. It's only about 20% that are refugees currently. And we have to recognize that, yes, diversity is our strength. And also, from a climate point of view around the world, the number of climate refugees is only going to increase over the coming years, and we need to be ready to step up, not only in bringing economic, but also refugees are continuing to do so across the country. And what I've heard when I speak with newcomers across our community, what they're sharing is it's actually more about not simply bringing newcomers to our community, but how we support them when they get here. And so answering the question, I think the points on credentialing are critical points to be made. I want to be clear, Greens and myself are strong in terms of ensuring we look at working with professional associations that foreign credentials are recognized across the country, and so that we have high-skilled immigrants who are working in their professions. In addition to that, we need to also look at increasing funding for organizations like the Multicultural Center and the YMCA and the various language programs that they provide. It's also about the connections that people need. It's skills, but it's relationships too. And making sure that we're supporting newcomers to build the relationships they need to be integrating into the workforce. And speeding up family reunification. The last point I hear most of all, if we want to make sure we're bringing in newcomers well, is looking at the cost of housing. Because if you're a newcomer to our community on limited income and the vast majority of your income is going to housing, we're not putting that person in a good position to thrive in their community or in the workplace. And that's why housing, well, for a variety of reasons, but this is one of the reasons why we need to be looking at the affordability of housing and investing at a time when house prices and rents continue to go up.
Thank you. We will move on to closing remarks from the candidates. 1 minute maximum. It's the reverse of the original rotation. So we'll begin with Mr. Saini.
Thank you very much for everyone for being here today. This election is a stark choice. It's a choice between the past and the future. Over the last 4 years, I've been inspired by so many people in this community of all the hard work they have done and using the resources they have to make this one of the best ridings and one of the best regions in the country. As a government, we have made tremendous progress over the last 4 years. But there's much more to do, and we recognize that. We need to build on the successes that we have already accomplished together in making sure that we deliver social justice to Canadians, in making sure that we fight climate change, in making sure that we create a more inclusive and diverse country, in making sure that we take care of our seniors, in making sure that the Canada Child Benefit helps more and more young people, making sure that we invest in infrastructure and public transit. But more importantly, I need your help. I need your help because of the progress we have made. We cannot go to the past. This is a stark choice. Either we go forward or we go backward. And I need your support on October 21st because I think and I know that we have much more building to do. We have many more great things to do together, not only as a region, but also as a country. And I need your help to carry on, to move forward, to choose forward. Thank you very much.
Mr. Moraga.
Thank you. I'm a young scientist, environmental scientist, and as everyone has said here tonight and says constantly, we need to listen to scientists and we need to listen to young people. So please, listen to me and let me be your voice. Young people are getting involved. I'm getting involved. And we're not afraid to take up positions of power and take up responsibility. It's our job to inherit the world, and we want to start having a voice in those decisions, and we should have a voice in those decisions. We are ready to take up that responsibility. And so I ask that when you're considering who you should support, consider supporting a young person who has to take on this debt, who has to take on the climate crisis, who has to take on all of the problems that are coming. And the world is changing more and more every day, and we need people who are responsive and who are ready to take up those challenges. So on October 21st, I ask that you consider voting NDP. We already have our nice provincial oasis of orange with Catherine Fife and Laura May Lindo. So I would have strong partners to work with as my provincial counterparts to advocate for you at the federal level as well, and make sure that Kitchener Centre and Waterloo Region is on the map and is supported. Thank you.
Mr. Morris, closing remarks.
Yeah, having been out talking with folks across our community since now the beginning of May, what I've found as I continue to have more and more of these conversations is we actually have a lot of common ground. The priorities around investing in housing, investing in our healthcare, taking science-based action on climate change. These actually aren't partisan issues. And that's why I think it's so critical that at this moment in time, we turn down all the mudslinging and all the promises and all the rest. Because for my part, what this is actually about is working hard on our behalf, as I've said a few times, right across party lines, working with parliamentarians across the country to make progress on priorities that are shared, both in our community and right across the country. And as our member of parliament in Ottawa, that's actually what I can promise to do. Is I can promise to be working respectfully, to be working hard, and to be working together to make progress on the priorities we all share. Thank you.
Mr. Bernier, closing remarks.
This election is about change. The PPC is the party of consensus. We represent in many ways the best values of these parties and oppose their worst. The opioid crisis is a humanitarian crisis. Mr. Saini and his government have a big fail on the report card, and the rest of the parties in Parliament are somewhat complicit. It's a lot shorter distance from comfort to need. It's important to remember that in our community and from coast to coast Canada. Max and I will see you tonight, 7 p.m., and October 21st again, when it's Bernier, Bernier, Bernier.
Mr. Woodworth, closing remarks.
I feel I should apologize a little bit for how strongly I came on in my opening remarks. I actually surprised myself at how passionately I am upset with indifferent politicians who treat people like statistics and make grandiose, unachievable promises with other people's money. I really hope you don't think that all politicians are like that. We can meet the challenge of climate change without increasing taxes or without throwing anyone out of work. We can improve health and social programs without massive deficits. We can expect ethical conduct and realistic policies from our leaders. I hope listening to the sensible conservative platform of helping ordinary families get ahead makes you realize that some politicians are different. I have the skills and apparently the passion to do what you need in an MP. On October 21st, please vote Stephen Woodworth.
Thank you. On behalf of the Chamber and Rogers, I would like to thank all candidates for taking time from their busy schedules to participate in this forum tonight. I would also like to thank the Sunbridge Hotel for hosting, and of course everyone from the community for your attendance. If you are a resident of Kitchener Centre, the election date is rapidly approaching, so please ensure you're aware of voting locations. The Chamber and Rogers hope this forum has provided some relevant perspectives on your issues of concern. Thank you and have a great evening.